The good things about living in Gateshead are the fact that it's not Newcastle and it really gets up their nose.
The cosmopolitan atmosphere.
The Metro Centre, good shopping.
The Baltic, the Sage, the Millennium Bridge and the Angel of the North.
Good things about living in Gateshead. There's not many southerners up here. If Gateshead was a three-course meal, it would be chips, chips and chips.
Beans, beans and more beans. Gruel, tripe and stotties.
Mark Steele's in town.
Thanks very much. Good evening. Good evening and welcome to Mark Steele's in Town, which this week comes from the Town Hall in Gateshead. On the enthusiastic Gateshead on the banks of the River Tyne, right opposite its smaller cousin, the sleepy suburb of Newcastle. In fact, Gateshead's official motto, I noticed, written on the shield above the town hall door is, "We're not Newcastle, we're Gateshead!" We've got an Angel of the North, they haven't. Which is probably just as well, because if they had one in Newcastle, they'd all be stood underneath it with their shirts off all day, going, "Come on then, you didn't frighten me! You 100-ton rusty puff with your wings like biplanes, I'll take you." The Angel of the North is obviously part of Gateshead, a very important part of this side of the river. I'll come on to that later. But I'm not so sure, I have to say, about your other prominent statue here, the Sports Day thing by the Metro station, which I think it's fair to say is the ugliest statue in the world and seems to commemorate the achievements of sportsmen by depicting an athlete with a Mohican mounting a tortoise. Or, might be being unfair, it might be a traditional custom round here. Every time Gateshead win a match in the Blue Square Premier League across the town, there's tortoises going, "Oh no. Oh, just find some lettuce, put it out your mind, block it out, here we go." Also, there's a magnificent underground system that sort of covers most of Gateshead, and I really like it because it's a proper industrial underground system. It's sort of clanky and loud and like an underground railway should be. And I love that you don't call it the Underground, like it's nothing to do with London. You call it the Metro, like you're at one with Paris. And I bet you go, "That's not the High Street, that's the Champs de Bloody Élysées, that." You are, of course, still Geordies, in a sense, in Gateshead. You're now in the middle, in Gateshead as well, of this £50 squillion, whatever it is, regeneration scheme of things that are being transformed right by the riverside. There's even a Gateshead Hilton, which at first I thought was a euphemism for the accident and emergency. I wonder if Mr. Hilton named his least favourite daughter Gateshead. There's the Sage Concert Hall, of course, big sort of bubbly snail-looking peculiar thing there. And there's the Baltic Art Gallery, part of this regeneration scheme. Now, I've been round there twice now. And the first time I drifted off a bit, to be honest. It's not really my thing. But I did notice as I was walking past that there was a chemist in the art gallery. And I thought, oh, there's a chemist in the art gallery. You wouldn't expect that, I suppose, for emergencies. I don't know. And then I walked past and I thought, oh, hang on, that's not a work of art, is it? And then sure enough, there was a sign up saying this is Damien Hirst's famous installation called The Pharmacy. The bloke I was with, I said to him, do you reckon if you moved some of these tablets just along a few inches that Damien Hirst had come in and go, "No, you've ruined it!" And as I did it, I just sort of touched this glass cabinet. And honestly, this bloke, security guard man, he came running right across the room, right into me face. He went, "Don't you touch that! This is a work of art worth £10 million! And I said, well, it's not now, is it? I've spoilt it. It's only worth £9 million. And he went even closer, right at me nose. He went, oh, you think you're very funny, you, don't you? And I thought, this place is class. Even the pretentious art snobs are hard. This is fantastic. You go into an art gallery around here, say the wrong thing. Are you having a go at Botticelli's perspective? Come here and share that. While his girlfriend goes, leave it, Darren, it's not worth it. It's from his later Orange period. I'm much more impressed, I have to say, by the campaign to save the Get Carter car park. This is the car park still there, despite the fact that everything around it has been demolished. That is no longer any use as a car park because you can't get to or from it. And it's there because it was the car park in the famous murder scene in Get Carter, which was chosen for the film because it was suitably horribly grim. And it's due to be demolished, but the Get Carter Appreciation Society say it should be preserved as a famous building, which is fantastic because it is famous. It's famous for being horrible. You can't knock that down. It's the ugliest building in the world, man. That's fantastic. How brilliant when you compare this to other preservation campaigns that you get. Someone comes on BBC Two and I believe that it is vital that Lansbury House is preserved as an example of classic Georgian architecture with its unique period rounded gables. Compare that to, you cannot demolish. That is where Alf Roberts was tipped off the roof. Today I saw some graffiti that said, "Let us never forget, an icon for millions around the world." And I swear, if you didn't know, you would think, is this about some sort of Central American leader that has been... that was shot dead by some paramilitary forces backed by the American government or something, and there was going to be some sort of speech later on of people going, remember, this is a terrible injustice and inequality that has been dished out to our people, and whatever happened, we will remember for many, many generations that we must revenge the terrible injustice of the car park being demolished where Alf Roberts... The other building that's about to be demolished, or that has been due to be demolished for some time in Gateshead, is the Dunstan Rocket. This is a block of flats on the estate in Dunstan, a part of Gateshead, and a block of flats that's shaped like a rocket, which would have made a wonderful, quirky place to live, but for the fact that it was unbloody habitable. Luckily, though, Dunstan has another boast. It is the estate where Paul Gascoigne was brought up. He was born in the Elizabeth Hospital, brought up in Pitt Street, first played football in Edison Gardens and then in Saltwell Park. And in his book, he describes lots of the sweet little cheruby antics that he got up to in the area with his mate Jimmy Five Bellies. For example, I'll quote this from his book. "We got hold of an air gun, and Jimmy stood 20 yards away with his pants down, and I fired at his bare arse. For each of the pellets I hit him with, I had to pay him £25. His arse ended up looking like the end of a watering can." That is literature. The spirit of Gateshead, I think, comes through on the marvellous website called Gateshead Then Till Now, which starts by saying at a latitude of 55 degrees north, you might think it would be cold, but with global warming now it isn't. So that's all worked out for the best, isn't it? I said I didn't think you felt the cold up here anyway. Oh, that's why you never see a Geordie weatherman. They'd just be stood there in February on the telly with their shirt off going, there's an icy front coming in from Siberia, but I don't feel it, me. Something else in your favour is you're clearly not willing to sacrifice the local spirit just to suck up to the posh layers of society. For example, in 1831, the town applied to be represented by its own Member of Parliament, but the Marquis of Londonderry refused this, saying, "Gateshead is a mere suburb, a long, dirty lane leading to Newcastle. It is a most filthy spot containing the vilest class of society." And on the Gateshead Then Till Now website, after that quote, it says, "He wants his ears boxed." Even the local history website's hard. Local historians sit round at their meetings, go, "Have you seen what Samuel Pepys wrote about us? Let's go and get him." I think it's quite sweet in some ways, though, that at least there was a time when the upper class said what they actually thought, rather than now when they think exactly the same but then have to apologise for every time they've said it, you know. So, you know, Boris Johnson will be up here one day going, yes, well, I'm deeply sorry if I did offend the people of Gateshead when I said that if you've seen the women up here, you can understand why they do that to the tortoise. It really wasn't meant. It was just an off-the-cuff remark, and I was no offence meant. No one seems to have impressed J.B. Priestley. He wrote in 1934, "No true civilization could have produced such a town, which is nothing better than a dingy dormitory. Whoever designed Gateshead was a true enemy of the human race." Now, strangely, there is no record of J.B. Priestley ever having done a book signing in the Metro Shopping Centre, Waterstones. Also, I didn't realise this, it's Gateshead and not Newcastle where the Blaydon races were. This is the Geordie anthem written by a man called George Ridley, an unemployed labourer in the 1860s, and the verse that's known is a jolly song about the community all off to see the races. And its famous last line, which I'm sure you can all sing if I count to three, goes 1, 2, 3... The very last line. Going down the Scots. Thank you very much, David. Magnificent rendition. So now this is a great song then to counter the image of the place being just sort of rough. This is a marvellous, jolly community sing-along song. The third verse is even jollier about a family day out because a wheel comes off the bus. And then it goes, when we get the wheel put on, away we went again. But them that got their noses broke, they came back o'er home. Some went to the dispensary and others to Dr. Gibbs, and some sought out the infirmary to mend their broken ribs. But I think to make it even more realistic, the song actually should have ended. The doctor said, I'll feel your ribs and check your pulse and heart. But this is not the infirmary, it's just a work of art. Even better, the last year that the Blaydon races actually took place was 1916. There was a riot following the disqualification of a horse. So up here, when people talk about the pointless violence of 1916, this is the only place where people think, hey, if they'd not disqualified that horse, it wouldn't have happened. I bet the lads from here that went to the Somme went, oh, it's nice to get a bit of peace and quiet. When I started reading about Gateshead, I thought, right, now, to start off with, don't just go along the lines of the old stereotypes of them all like in fighting. There's a lot more to it than that. And so I started reading this book, first book I read about Gateshead, and it's called Around Gateshead. And the second sentence goes... There was a church close to this site many centuries ago, but in 1080 it was burnt down by locals with the Bishop of Durham inside. But mostly the history of Gateshead seems to be centred around this insistence that you're not Newcastle. Even in 1552 there was an Act of Parliament passed that annexed Gateshead to Newcastle. So this is vicious stuff. You were annexed. I bet at the time in Afghanistan people were going, see what happened now in Gateshead, why can't they just sit down because... A book called The County of Durham described this whole business from the Gateshead point of view. It says, the feud grew to a frenzy when the wicked Newcastleites got an act passed to amalgamate the two towns. And then it says, Gateshead rose as one and declared, the town of Gateshead is good and wholesome. It is known that the south side of the river is deep and more clean than the side towards Newcastle. How can a river be more clean? Even the river, like the river's going, oh, I'm all nice and flowing down the Gateshead side. There's probably another bit that goes, the martyrs of Gateshead shall rise forth from the Metro shopping centre and float across the Tyne in mighty vengeance against the infidel Newcastleites. And then call everyone to prayer. Why In some ways, the Tyne is very much like the Thames in London, obviously, in that it was just so busy 150 years ago. And you look at the pictures, it just makes it look as if the river was where all the life was, and the land was the tranquil part, if you like. The bridges are just so magnificent because they're all higgledy-piggledy and wrong, big and small and different colours, and they've not been planned. So I think I love that. Even the bridges have become centres of dispute about where on the bridge the border is. And this issue isn't over. Even now, the Gateshead website, where it mentions the Millennium Bridge, says the bridge is 100% Gateshead. You take this seriously, the border, don't you? I bet when the Berlin Wall come down, some of you rang the Stasi and said, "Don't chuck that wall away, we'll have it over here." But there's a reason. The reason why Newcastle was so keen to grab Gateshead, which was that this is the first area in the country where coal was worth a fortune. The coal was near the surface, it was next to the river, so the first mining rights were granted in 1344 when tunnels were driven into the bank and the shafts were sunk. And I just find this amazing. There was coal mining going. It just seems wrong, like if you said, by 1450 we had digital radio around here. None of that analogue rubbish. When Walter Raleigh brought back the potato, we said, well, you can take that to South Shields, we've got Doritos already. And you can take your tobacco away, man, like we're Geordies, we had tubs when we were amphibians. The last pits shut here in 1983, and I did go to one, Marley Hill, there, an ex-pit up the road. And on the way to the pit village, I came across the Tanfield Railway that somebody showed me, and I was told that that was the earliest known railway in the world that's still running in some capacity. It goes back to the 1620s. And I thought, no, don't tell me that as well. The 1620s? How many more things like this have you got? 1683, Shortwell Park. That's the first time anybody used Windows 7. This is... The claim is that the Tanfield Railway took coal down to Dunstan, that the Causey Arch on that railway line is the oldest bridge for a railway in the world. And I went to the engine shed, and every day it was like there's somebody there just covered in oil mending some old steam engine. And then on Sundays they all get dressed up in their uniforms and they blow whistles, and hundreds of kids all sort of chug up and down on these trains. And there's just no way you could see any of this and not think these people are just so brilliantly full of enthusiasm for getting trains running. Why don't we put them in charge of the National Rail Service? It's just obvious. But the biggest Gateshead hero of the 1800s, and this is an amazing story, I think, was someone called Harry Clasper. Harry Clasper had worked in the pits, he'd been a ship's carpenter, and he then became so famous that when he died, 130,000 people came to his funeral. So I'm just interested to know, do people here know what he did? He was a rower, clearly you all know about this. In the 1840s, rowing events up the Tyne regularly drew crowds of between 50,000 and 100,000. And Harry won the Thames Regatta 7 times. He was World Coxed 4 champion, which he won in a boat with his 3 brothers. Now, at this point, anyone not from Gateshead listening to this must be like I was when I first heard this and think, rowing? Gateshead? 100,000? Are you winding me up? At first I wondered if I'd misread it and he was rowing champion. Because you think of rowing as Oxford and Cambridge and rowing lakes at Eton and Henley Regatta, and you don't think of the Henley Regatta as something that 100,000 rowdy people would turn up to, and they certainly wouldn't sing the Blaydon races, would they? Unless they had a version that went, "Hooray, the lads, you should have seen us punting. Sipping Pims and finding ways to beat the ban on hunting. All the lads and lasses you can see there a disturbance, walking down the private drive to sack 2 of the servants." Harry Clasper redesigned the boat so that the hull wasn't in contact with the water as much. And this was an enormous innovation in the history of boat making. And he also completely changed the way that rowers rowed, because he was the first person to pioneer the idea that you should sort of slide backwards and forwards to use your legs as part of the act of rowing. So he was this extraordinary character. If rowing's going to become popular again, then it needs these sorts of innovations, like fitting some of the boats with weapons. I'd watch that, the boat race. I'd watch it then if it was between Oxford, Cambridge and a Geordie on a pedalo with a torpedo. All through the 19th century, there were just these amazing things going on up here. Apparently the first house ever to be lit with electricity was in Mosley Street. And this was as a result of a Gateshead inventor called Joseph Swan. And amazingly, there was another first next door to him. The first people ever to bypass the meter and nick the electric off their neighbours. Swan even patented the light bulb, apparently, a year before Thomas Edison. And other fun that happened here throughout this time, because Durham and Northumberland were the two regions throughout all of this period that were consistently top of the National Drunkenness League. So to try and curb this trend, a series of temperance halls were set up in 1846, but eventually they reported, throughout the region, only 73 adults have registered as teetotalers and 49 juveniles. The Gateshead Then Till Now site says, it's often claimed that there are so many pubs in the high street it's not possible to do a pub crawl having a half in every one. But then it says, however, at its peak there were 32 pubs. Well, excuse me, but that's only 16 pints. I went up the high street last night for a drink, and I settled upon the delights of the Metropole. And it was one of the most exciting, wonderful nights I have ever had in my life. There were 4 other people in there, none of which had any teeth. And there was a bloke who at some point in his life must have heard a funny joke, because he kept shouting the punchline, going, "They thought he meant the budgie!" Over and over and over again, expecting people to laugh again and again. And one of these blokes came over to me, and he stood right over me, and he went, "I drink Scottish and Newcastle, me, but I don't only drink that leak. I normally swap to another ale leak, and then I have another ale, and then I go back to Scottish and Newcastle. And then I have another leak, different ale, might be the same as the different ale I had earlier, it might be the same or different, and then I go back to Scottish and Newcastle, and I alternate like that leak, and that way I don't get bored." Something else that might surprise people is that since Victorian times, Gateshead has had a fair-sized Jewish community. That's several hundred Jewish families here now. But its importance is apparently much bigger than you'd guess. The book about the local community says, Gateshead has been described as a powerhouse of Judaism and the Jerusalem of England. I don't mean to be rude, but I think he was overselling the place. Imagine setting up a religious cult and promising you'll lead them to Jerusalem and then bringing them to Gateshead. Here you are, I told you, not only an angel but a brutal car park, it's paradise. Also, I can't help thinking that a Jewish Geordie must be one that goes out in February saying, "I'm not wearing me skull cap, I don't feel the cold, me." But then the story gets just magnificently Gateshead, because the founder of the community set up his own synagogue. But the chief rabbi of Britain told him the worst thing that you could say to anyone from Gateshead. He said, "You're not important enough to be independent, you've got to be part of the Newcastle synagogue." And the chief rabbi refused to allow the Gateshead group to have their own Sefer Torah, which is a scroll that is needed to conduct an official service. And so they bought a secret one and kept it in a drawer, hidden from everyone. So Gateshead should be immensely proud of that. That the Jewish community would rather enrage the chief rabbi, break their own religious rules and risk making God furious than be part of Newcastle. But most of all, you've got an angel. The Angel of the North, a splendid specimen, a vast statue by the A1, designed by artist Anthony Gormley. I don't know, there's something about it. As a complete artistic ignoramus that I am, I think there's something just very exciting and brilliant about the Angel. And when you go up there, it's sort of especially so, because it's just built on a sort of craggy, muddy field on the edge of a council estate, and it's clunky and rusty, and it's approachable, like a Geordie angel. It's like it's saying, excuse me, but 16 paints would hardly wet the tips of my wings. And it weighs 200 tonnes, and when it was put up in 1997, it came from Hartlepool on 3 trucks, and 20-metre concrete piles had to be sunk into the ground as a precaution against subsidence. Which you've got to think, well, it's just as well they did that. You wouldn't want that subsiding, would you? Imagine that sliding down the road towards Low Fell, be like a science fiction film, wouldn't it? With a general called in going, my guess is he wants a fight with the Dunstan rocket. I'm just going to quote the Daily Mail at the time. There's a chap called John Casey who said, it is sure to cause a fatal accident, in which case no doubt its name will be changed to the Angel of Death. So what's the general feeling now? Is people like it? Yes. So I should just finish the show tonight, Gateshead, by saying that I think in a lot of ways the Angel sums up the spirit of Gateshead. If something's going to win people over around here, it clearly isn't going to do it by being pretentious. I think my favourite ever barman I ever came across was from Gateshead. But I went to this little hotel that I was put in by mistake. It was only a small little place, and it had champagne bar up there, which was a little bit above its station, really. And we were in there, and it was a bit of a special occasion, and we said, we'll get a bottle of champagne. And this barman looked at us and he went, all right, champagne, right? And he turned round and he got this dusty old menu from a top shelf, and he looked at it and he just opened it up and he went, are you sure, Lake? Have you seen the prices?
Mark Steele's In Town was written and performed by Mark Steele with additional material by Pete Sinclair. The producer was Julia Mackenzie.
Tring in Hertfordshire.
Such a lovely area.
Peaceful rolling Chiltern Hills.
They have got a traditional hardware store. You can buy screws individually.
There's no end of things to do in Tring.
The train station is miles away.
They haven't got any banks anymore.
It makes up for it in other ways.
Got an incredible amount of amazing stuffed animals.
Dead stuffed animals.
Kids love it. It's just fabulous.
Zebras. Dogs.
The leopard.
And the wasps.
Elephant seal.
There's an amazing bear.
Big cats.
Sarah Brightman.
Lots of Rothschilds.
I think there's a football referee, but I can't remember what he's called.
It's a wonderful place to go. You've got to come along.
You know what? I love the snakes.
Mark Steele's in town.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Welcome to Mark Steele's in Town, which this week comes from the Hertfordshire town of Tring. A vision of the future, as long as you're viewing it from 1750. Because you could film 10 minutes of Tring High Street and tell people it's a children's TV show from 1964. Hello, it's morning in Trington. Here's Mr. Boot, the cobbler from Tring Shoe Repairs, and Mrs. Conquat, the organic grocer. And this is Mr. Truncheon, the policeman. Is the police station open today? Of course not. You've walked here from Berkhamsted, haven't you? It's very modern in Berkhamsted, isn't it? They've got a Waitrose. Ah, here's Mr. Rothschild, who owns you all. And here's Mrs. Abroad, Trington's only foreigner. I was on Tring Radio and somebody called in to say, you must go to Almar Printers. It's amazing. And I asked what was amazing about it, and they said they've got a photocopier now. The police station is a charming building that holds the record for being the most useless police station in the world. It's not like one of those awful chain police stations that's linked to the police. Or might have a policeman in it. It's a cosy, independent one, covered in cobwebs. No one has been in there for at least 20 years. But you're a lovely town with lots of commuters. It's only 35 minutes by train from Euston to Tring. And the marvellous thing is once you get to Tring, you're only 10 miles further away from Tring than you were when you were at Euston. Tring Station is sort of the station for Tring, in the same way that Great Missenden Station is the station for Rome. It's £7 in a taxi from Tring Station to Tring. Someone called Anthony sent me a message on Twitter that went, not only is Tring Station miles from actual Tring, it has a minicab firm, John's Cabs, that appears to only have one cab. But you love your little sweet independent shops here, Tring. There's not many chain shops, there's not even a bank. Though you could just call the branch of Lloyd's in High Wycombe the Tring Bank. So there's this lovely sweet high street. I've been told that Tring has more small businesses for the population than any other town in Britain. And I can believe that, because I was in the bookshop behind a woman I'd never met before who said, hello, I'm a painter. I said, oh, that's nice. She said, would you like to buy my landscape of bluebells on the road to Marsworth? Here's my card. Then I realised everybody here is like that. You just walk round the park and somebody says, excuse me, I make personalised cheese graters. Here's my card. But there's one sort of business that's especially successful here, which is hardware shops. You've got two of them, Grace's hardware shop and Metcalfe's hardware shop. There's only a few hundred people live in the whole town. You must have 9 spirit levels each. Baths full of raw plugs. I imagine the town is split between Grace supporters and Metcalfe supporters. And families tell their kids, we're Grace in this house, always have been, always will. Whichever side you're on, Tring, as we know, is part of the hills known as the Chilterns, and Tring itself is divided into lots of different areas. There's the central part that you call the Tring Triangle, which I think is called that because planes and ships disappear when they go through. And that is one of the theories about why the station is so far away. There was a train that stopped here once, it vanished in some mist. You're just right here in Tring with your small business spirit. You don't want to be all posh like Berkhamsted. And you don't want to be like Hemel Hempstead with its branch of William Hills and its odd smattering of Labour voters. And its huge roundabout that's designed to get you confused so you break down so they can nick your shopping out the boot. The big city, of course, is Aylesbury. That's where you go if you want something that isn't handmade. But if you go in the other direction, now this is what someone told me, they said the LU postcode is very much looked down upon. You're not to play with him, darling. He's from Ivinghoe. I've looked it up and it's LU. It doesn't even mean Luton LU, it just means the Royal Mail categorise it as in the Luton region for administrative purposes. But poor Luton is so hated. You go, the fact that their envelopes brush against post from Luton is enough for me. We're not having people from there in the house. But the main story of Tring is how you're owned by the Rothschilds. This is the world's richest and most famous banking family. And in 1872, the family bought Tring Park Mansion. So now almost everything in the town is named after a family of bankers, but somehow you've got no bank. In 1872, Lionel Rothschild bought Tring Park as a wedding present for his son Natty, because this is how the aristocracy works. I think we should own Tring and give it to our offspring. Of course, if we loved him more, we'd buy him Berkhamsted. And the Rothschild who came to dominate the town completely was Natty's son, Walter. In his biography, which was written by his niece, Miriam, she wrote, "The Rothschilds are a truly incestuous family." This is assumed to be in order to keep the family fortune intact. But with the Rothschilds, usually the explanation is they do fall in love with each other. Walter's niece remarked, "It was a wise man who knew which Rothschild was his own father." So Natty and the Baroness of Tring had a child, and the child was Walter. And he was sent to work running a bank by his father, and according to his niece Miriam, he was there for 18 years, and there is not one piece of evidence to say he worked there for one single day. But the contribution he did make to Tring was he bought dozens of kangaroos and ostriches and he released them around Tring. And his biggest obsession was cassowaries, birds that are 6 feet tall with a blue head and claws that can cut through metal and run at 30 miles an hour, which sounds more like the sort of thing they'd have in Luton. And they would run round the park. One of them attacked a horse. Imagine if a working class person walked a cassowary around the park. "Oi, Tyson, get here! Get here! Sorry, mate, bloody cassowary. Don't worry, he won't hurt you. He's all feathers. Get here!" Eventually, when Walter Rothschild was 40, his father said that he didn't have to pretend to work for the bank anymore. They cut him out of the will, but they did leave him enough to set up the Natural History Museum so that he could get all his animals stuffed and keep them in one place. And that is how you ended up with your bonkers museum. That is the main reason that anyone has heard of Tring. Now, the main point here, though, Tring, is this is the family that has owned your town for 150 years, and they're deranged. You're so used to having a mad museum full of crazy stuffed animals, including a dodo, you think it's more amazing that the printer has a new photocopier. So the museum started in 1892, and it is like some sort of avant-garde, mind-altering place you expect to see in Berlin or New York, but it's in Tring. And Rothschild dedicated his life to collecting animals that he could stuff. And his biography says he received visitors at Tring stark naked, swinging in his hammock at 22 stone. And now, when I came across this, I thought maybe I should revise my idea that Tring is really a kiddies' TV show. Hello, Mr. Rothschild. And what strange creature is that in your hammock? Oh dear, Mr. Rothschild. I think you'd better put that away and put something on before you're dealt with as restraining order. Rothschild used to drive around Tring in a carriage pulled by zebras, having trained them specially. This is all very Tring, that in the 1930s, Walter Rothschild had 2 more zebras to take him about than the number of taxis the whole town has 90 years later. He procured 144 giant tortoises, and there's a famous photograph of him sitting on the back of one, and he would steer the tortoise using leaves of lettuce. And this all went on in quaint little Tring with your happy market and everyone painting bluebells. The heart of a town is a scene from a film made in 1967 by a bloke who'd eaten a pound of acid. He went to the Galapagos Islands to collect the tortoises. A Natural History of Walter Rothschild says Walter acquired Ratuma, reputed to be the largest tortoise in the world, who was thought to be 150 years old. He had lived for many years on the grounds of a lunatic asylum in the suburbs of Sydney, where he had arrived as a gift from the King of Tonga. See, you just go, yeah. Anywhere else, they go, what? There's 40 mental things in there in a row. But Nothing surprises you here. Nothing. It wouldn't surprise if I went then. Walter went to Iceland to collect a sea lion that played the xylophone, and when it arrived in Tring, the sea lion fell in love with Stanley Baldwin, who made him Minister of Transport. I think we learned about that at school. I'm sure everyone from Hertfordshire goes on school trips. Is that the first time you all went? When I was on Tring Radio, a man called in to say he used to go there as a kid, and he always played a game where he tried to throw aniseed balls into the crocodile's mouth. So maybe in 500 years, a biologist will study that crocodile and write, "I have become certain that the crocodile lives off a diet of aniseed balls." Now, I would like to speak to Simon, please. So, Simon, your job is?
Security manager at Tring Natural History Museum. I've been looking for the guy throwing the sweets into the crocodile for some time. Could you give me his details?
Simon, you were telling us about this Victorian obsession there was.
Well, yeah, the Victorians had obsession with collecting animals. Rothschild started collecting from the age of 5.
That would be quite disturbing, wouldn't it, if you had a 5-year-old?
He had his own taxidermist at the age of 7.
What are you doing, darling? What have you done to the cat? How long does it take, Simon, before you stop seeing the museum as odd?
Never. There's 1.1 million exhibits back of house. It's the world's best collection of birds, eggs and nests. It's a national collection. And I've got 10 scientists who are completely unique individuals who are very interesting. And then the people from Tring come in as well.
What's the questions that the kids ask?
Well, we look at the penguin. We have the first penguin that was stuffed in the world, and it's 6 inches too tall because they'd never seen one before. So I tell everyone when they brought it back to preserve it, they covered it in chocolate, and that's where penguins come from.
That's probably been written in someone's PhD now. Strangely, the most incredible exhibits of all are not the giant things, but the fleas. Because at the edge of one of the galleries are the famous fleas of Tring, brought back from Mexico, where they'd been dressed as Mexicans. That's to say, lest there be any doubt or confusion, the fleas have little flea-sized Mexican costumes. You all think this is normal, don't you? So I was doing a show in this theatre and someone shouted out towards the end, "Have you seen the fleas dressed as Mexicans, Mark?" And of course I thought this was a joke, but everyone was screaming, "It's true!" And I went, "No, of course it isn't." And everyone was going, "Yes, there are! Of course there are fleas dressed as Mexicans, you idiot! How can you think there aren't fleas dressed as Mexicans?" Because you're the only people who hear about fleas dressed as Mexicans and go, "Oh yeah, I've seen those." So, Simon, I've got to ask you, how did the fleas get there?
On a bike. They were gifts. They were Victorian curios, so husbands would buy their wives these curio as gifts, and we sell them in the shop for Christmas if people want to come and get some.
Here's my card. There was another creature introduced to Tring Park in 1902 and it became their home, which was the edible dormouse. The official name is the gliss, and they only lived in mainland Europe. But Walter Rothschild brought them here and they bred until there was millions of them all over Tring. A report in 2006 said they live in your loft, they gnaw through your wiring, strip fruit trees, you can't touch them because they're protected, and they all descend from 6 brought to Tring by Baron Rothschild. Have you all got some here? Yeah. You're lucky his cassowaries didn't breed like that, really. Couldn't sleep again last night. We got cassowaries in the loft. It's no wonder you need 2 hardware shops. You all have to replace 100 foot of cable every day. I was thinking of Walter Rothschild as an eccentric English gent. A jolly sort. It's not like he did anything important. But he was the MP for round here. Somehow, people thought that bloke who lets lethal birds loose and greets visitors while naked in a hammock, let's put him in charge. And that, I do grant you, now doesn't seem that mad. Maybe one reason why the Rothschilds bought Tring and Walter put the museum here was they knew it would be safe. What harm could come to any of the exhibits in cosy little Tring? And that's how we come to the Great Feather Heist. The incident in which the museum was broken into and millions of pounds worth of feathers were stolen in a great British crime. One day the security man noticed a window at the back of the museum was smashed, and a couple of people looked around and they couldn't see anything, so they assumed it was just a vandal. Maybe there was a new business in the area where someone says, "Hello, I'm Marjorie. If you'd like a random window smashed, here's my card." But 1 month later, it was discovered that huge drawers full of valuable feathers had gone missing and no one had noticed. They'd gone. Like the management of the Louvre going, "Oh, did there not used to be a painting of Smiley Woman?" The thief was a man called Edwin Wrist, who was 20 years old, and he just walked in through the window that he'd smashed, and he filled a suitcase with feathers, walked to the station, which must have been the hardest bit. And it's recorded that he got on the train and that the guard actually asked if he wanted any help with his case. And he went, "Oh, no, thanks, mate. It's light as a..." No, it's not. Now, the reason Edwin took them was he was a fly fisherman who was an expert at tying feathers in a perfect knot for the bait. And the price of top quality feathers could be $100 each. And as well as being awarded by Fly Tie magazine, the fly tyer of the future, Edwin was also a professional flautist. Even better, he wanted to sell the feathers to fly fishing experts so he could raise the money to buy a golden flute. It's not normal. It's like some sort of psychedelic prog rock album made in 1967 by someone who swallowed all the mushrooms and made some silly record where they go, "He took all the feathers and he ran with a swish, all purple and crimson, to wave at the fish for a golden flute as his only wish." In a way, Edwin was following the small enterprise Tring spirit, because there's an organisation called Tring Together, and on their website is a list of 900 businesses. What can they all do? That's 30 for every person who lives here. This is just some of them. Tring Karate Club, Tring Tai Chi, Tring Brewery, which is glorious, Tring Squadron Air Training Corps, which is very important in case you have an air battle with the LU postcode above Whipsnade. Tring TP hire. It goes on. To be sensible, there is a reasonable explanation for why there are so many of these small businesses, which is that Tring is obviously the money laundering capital of the whole of Europe. Now, with us is Vivian, and you're part of Tring Together, is that right?
Yes, I am, yes.
And why are there so many businesses here, do you think? Because there's more than any other place.
Tring people are fantastic. They want to be involved. They want things to happen in their community. You ask them to do something, they just say yes. So I think if you're here, you know that there's people that you can give your card to and say, "Do you want a window broken or do you want some money laundered?" And your friends will be your customers. So I think that's part of it.
You show me this book, Tring People. The whole book is just pictures of people with their businesses, and it's just got a picture, and then at the bottom it's got what the business is. And some of them are brilliant, because a lot of people have got more than one business. This is one. Nigel Nutkins, fruit juice manufacturer and sports therapist. Malcolm Ferris-Lay is tea consultant, whitewater rafter and Highland dancer to the Queen Mother. In the end you think, oh, nothing had surprised me. The next one will just go, Billy Flapjack, harpsichord repairer, Zeppelin pilot and hitman. Vivian, I've got to ask you this. Why isn't there a Berkhamsted together? Seem to be one.
Well...
Not got it in them, have they?
No. Well, there was a Berkhamsted together. Tring Together managed to get lots of people to volunteer to help, and Berkhamsted wasn't quite like that.
I went there yesterday. It is a bit up itself. Other places near here. Right, so someone sent me a message insisting I went to cow roast. So, I went to cow roast, but it was a shame, really, because I only had a day and you can't take it all in. Now, very naively, I planned to go there for a Sunday roast at the Cow Roast Inn, because the Cow Roast Inn in Cow Roast must do roast cow, but it's the only pub in Cow Roast, and it's completely derelict and boarded up, and that's all there is in Cow Roast, just a crumbling building, about 3 houses, a garage, nothing else, like a little town in a western. You can imagine someone going, "This has always been a one-horse town around here, until a cassowary came down from the past and Tring. Now we don't even have the one house. Some of our fellas went into Tring to rob the bank, but they couldn't find the bank." The one thing they do have near there is a massive building called Norcott Hall, where Eva Perón, First Lady of Argentina, lived. What was she doing up there? Eva Perón, I went up there, there's this massive gated mansion that is currently for sale for offers in excess of £7 million. And I'll read part of the estate agent's notes. This vast property with extensive grounds is packed with amazing features, such as a balcony that is ideal for singing off. The list of people who have lived here is amazing. Someone said to me, if you're lucky in Pam's Sandwich Bar, you'll bump into Graham Poll, the football referee. The top referee who became famous because he gave the same player 2 yellow cards but forgotten he'd given him the first one and should have sent him off. And rather childishly, I think, a lot of people only remember him for that. And, if you did see him in Pam's Sandwich Bar, I'm sure he'd say, "Hello, I'm a referee, I'm available to come round your house and adjudicate on any game that you play. Here's my card." Oh, hang on, I've given you 2 by mistake. There's such a strange bunch of people who live round here. The famous actress Dame Peggy Ashcroft lived here in the park. She was a dame and she lived in the park in a sort of bandstand thing. Dame Peggy Ashcroft, one of the most famous actresses in British, lived in your park. Yeah, what? In the park. So, in the park, in a bandstand. Yeah, I know, yeah. You wouldn't think it was odd if you had an infestation of edible dames in your loft. You just go, "Oh no, Dame Judi Dench's gnawed through the wiring again." The reservoirs here are huge in the world of bird watching. I'm not sure I trust the book, The Birds of Tring. It lists the birds that are seen there. This is just literally the start. Shoveler, teal, goldeneye, goosander, smoo, greenshank, redshank, little stint, dunlin, sandpipers, on and on. Anywhere else you'd think they were just making it up, but I'd believe it here if it went griffin, pterodactyl. In late summer, owl from Harry Potter. Why would a bird want to come here? You'd get killed, stuffed, shoved in a drawer, stolen. And no one had noticed for a month. There's North Church, where you can visit the grave of Peter the Wild Boy. He was a feral boy in the woods of Germany who walked on all fours and lived on acorns and was found by King George I's huntsman in 1724. And the king brought him back here and put him in a suit and kept him as a pet. And I don't know why I'm bothering you. You're not going to be impressed with it. Yeah, we had a nest of wild boys in the garden. I mean, dug up the lawn. There's a book called The Washingtons of Tring about how George Washington's family lived in Tring until 1656, when George's grandfather moved to Virginia. And it's not surprising. The Rothschilds, the Washingtons, they all come from here. There's probably a book called The Einsteins of Tring and the Beyoncés of Tring and the John the Baptists of Tring and the Wayne Rooneys of Tring. I bet there are conspiracy theories where people go, all the families that rule the world come from there, right? The Washingtons came from there, and what did George Washington do? Chop down a cherry tree with an axe. And where did he get that, eh? The one place that's got 2 hardware shops. Think about it. So everything here looks like Trington, but it's not like that. There's a front garden competition, of course there is, but you expect to see the winner is Mrs. Birkenshaw, who has supplemented her lovely use of geraniums and lavender with a stuffed mammoth, with Dame Shirley Williams riding on it. Maybe there's something in the water from the reservoirs and the Chiltern Hills that makes this place so surreal. Nothing is quite as it seems here. The brilliant thing about Tring is you'll never quite work it out, I don't think, and it's probably best not to try. So it is like a children's story, but it's not Trington. It's like a story from Alice in Wonderland. So I will leave you, Tring, with this story from the famous book by Lewis Carroll, which is possible that he wrote after visiting here. "What happens when there's a crime?" said Alice to the cassowary. "Oh, there's no crime here," she said, "and if there is, we just go to the police station." "Then will the policeman solve the crime?" asked Alice. "No, because there isn't one, it's empty." "And if there's no one to register a crime, there can't be any crime." "So who makes the important decisions round here?" asked Alice. "The edible dormice, of course," said the cassowary. "They decide if your electricity cables get gnawed and if you get any sleep, and they're protected because they're in charge." "Where shall we go next?" asked Alice. "We could go from Tring to Tring Station," it said. "But isn't Tring Station in Tring?" asked Alice. "Of course not," said the cassowary. "What would be the point in that?" "All right then," said Alice, "but how will we get there? In a carriage pulled by fleas dressed as Mexicans and zebras, of course. How else?"
Mark Steele's In Town was written and performed by Mark Steele with additional material from Pete Sinclair. It was produced in Tring by Carl Cooper and was a BBC Studios production.
Good things about living in Otley St Mary, most people know each other. You can wander off to the shops on a Sunday morning, take half an hour to speak to people on the way.
It's an old town that hasn't changed much over the years. I wouldn't have stayed here if it wasn't very good, would I?
We have the famous tar barrelling, when various idiotic members of the town run through the town carrying blazing barrels of tar.
Nowhere else in the world can you get 30-odd people getting taken off to hospital with burns, and it's all official and legal.
If Otley St Mary was an animal, I think it would be something like a tiger, because it's outwardly very placid and peaceful, but it has a lot going on under the surface.
Mark Steele's In Town.
Thanks very much and welcome to Mark Steele's In Town, which this week comes from Ottery St Mary, the nightclub capital of East Devon. Literally a magnet for youth, with over 5 teenagers a year spotted in the town. Each saying, "We got the wrong bus, we're trying to get to Exeter." It is a small town, Ottery St Mary, with only 4 pubs, but it is eager to welcome outsiders. Even if you move here from outside the area, you're welcomed very, very quickly and accepted as an Ottery local. For a while, you might get people saying, "See that Bill? He ain't no proper Ottery boy. His great-grandfather come up from Sidmouth." Dave from Tip Hill, on the other hand, I trusted him proper, then did a DNA test on him. Turns out one of his ancestors came from Honiton back in Roman times, so he's a townie after all. Give him 5 more generations, he'll be proper Ottery, see? It's fair to say that the pace of life here in Ottery St Mary, it does take a little while to adjust to if you come from the city. I rang a hotel to book a room and I said, "So I'll see you about 11 then, I'll be there about 11 in the evening." And the manager said, "11? Oh dear, why so late?" I said, "Well, I'll be in Exeter up till then I'll be leaving there about 10:30. And he said, "Well, you'd best get a Travelodge in Exeter then, hadn't you?" Another difference in the culture that I noticed, I went in one of the cafes at exactly 20 to 3, and there was a big sign up saying soup. I said, "I'll have some soup, please." And the woman said, "No, you won't, not at this time of day." I thought, by mistake, did I say, "Good afternoon, I'm going to sit here and smoke some crack"? A bit early for that. I feel like someone who accidentally goes into Papua New Guinea and upsets a tribe. They believe soup in the afternoon makes their gods angry. The first conversation I heard here was in the Curious Otter bookshop. And a man came in while I was there, and I could hear this conversation that went, "Have you got that book I ordered?" And there was a gap of about a minute. bloke said, "Not come in yet, Ted." And then there was another minute, and Ted said, "I'll come back tomorrow then." It was like they were thinking, best leave these gaps between sentences, because if we string this dialogue out as long as possible, once it's over, we've got less of the day to kill. I did feel like a towny idiot when I asked around if there was a taxi. 3 people gave me exactly the same answer, honestly. They all said, well, there was supposed to be one outside the post office, but he's never there. I expected to be told, if you want a taxi, you're going to have to go to Exeter to get one. Don't know how you're going to get there, mind. But once you get past your city prejudices, you find areas there where it is clearly very, very lively. The Ottery Gazette, I'm sure you all know, it had a headline the first week that I came. That was, "Yes, the post office is still open." That was the week of the American election. But Ottery, of course, you all know this. Ottery may appear to be gentle and full of rural calm, but underneath, you're a tiger. And you love to celebrate the moments when Ottery has played a pivotal role in history, representing the jump from an old England to a new England with a series of festivals, often involving the most gloriously unnecessary risk to personal safety. For example, once a year, even by the standards of Barcelona or New York, Ottery St Mary goes berserk with a festival of tar barrels involving random acts of arson. And for people who don't know, it is a twist on a normal bonfire night, because instead of going to a bonfire, here the bonfire comes to you. At high speed, carried on someone's back in a barrel. Now, we have got some tar barrelers, as they're known in tonight, so we will be talking about the fires later on the off chance that they can resist their instincts and not burn down the hall. Now, I first came across this mixture of quiet on the surface and bonkers underneath in the tourist centre. I noticed that you could buy these table mats with a lovely picture of a man carrying a flaming barrel of tar. So I said to Phyllis, who works there, I said, "Oh, I like your table mats." And she said, "They're not table mats, they're mouse mats for a computer." I said, "Oh, all right, but you could use them as table mats." And she went, "Well, you've started up a controversy there." And I was in love with the place there, because I do love a tourist centre that is not afraid to argue with tourists. There's more to Ottery, of course, than just the town centre. There's a little suburb of Ottery St Mary called West Hill. Up the hill where the posh new houses are. Up on a hill so that they can look down on you. And every now and again they must go, "What are they doing down there?" "Oh my God, they're setting things alight. Quick, wake the children and put them in the Range Rover. We'll be back in London by the morning." It is amazing how much history there is generally in this area. For example, there's a house called Raleigh House with a plaque that says, "There is conjecture that Sir Walter Raleigh may have lived here." That's top marks for Keane, isn't it? Putting up plaques to people on the grounds that there's conjecture they may have lived there. You sit around each other's houses going, "Do you reckon Beethoven ever lived here?" "Might done, I suppose." "Well, that's enough conjecture. Stick a plaque up." In part, I'm sure you all know this whole area originally was shaped by the Danes, which is explained in this book, A Child's History of Exeter, that I got. This area was invaded 3 times in the 10th century by the Danes. And apparently, according to this book, the 3rd time it happened, the people of this area said, "Oh no, not the Danes again, surely." That's right. Can't we be pillaged by someone new? In a way, even the boundaries of the parish contain the contradiction of Ottery St Mary, the mix of calm Devon town with this fiery, excitable tradition underneath, because the borders were set by parish officials. And according to my History of the Town by John Whittam, in the Middle Ages, it was the duty of parish officials to walk round the boundaries annually to bless the crops, accompanied by local boys who were bounced on the stones, whipped, ducked in ponds and stood on their heads at landmarks so they would remember the boundaries for future generations. Maps? Nah, they're overrated. There's a song that celebrates the great events of Ottery through the centuries. A cheerful little song called The Ballad of Tilly Hake. This is how it starts. Tilly went walking in Ottery one day and saw a fine soldier on the highway. The boys all marched to the sound of the drum, but their mothers' hearts break before the battle is won. I thought, well, that's a bit of a sad start. Oh, here's the chorus. That'll lighten the mood. We need dreams, we need bread, for we'll soon all be dead. It was written by Morrissey. We'll all be dead because we're sick in the head. The next verse goes, Tilly went walking in Ottery one day and saw a black crow upon the highway. The cholera crow has come to town and death walks beside him in a silken gown. Well, don't read the next one. Probably go, Tilly went walking by the tumbling weir and saw a fine picture of a bonfire night here. What a sweet table mat, Tilly then said. It's a mouse mat, screamed the painter, and bashed Tilly dead. Now, there is one custom here that doesn't depend on burning everything in the vicinity. Apparently, when Christianity was introduced into the area in the 6th century, the local pixies were upset. As the pagan beliefs that they were part of weren't believed in anymore. And these imaginary creatures were so annoyed, especially when the bells were installed in the church, that the pixies took the local monks hostage, put them in a trance and marched them towards a cliff. And then the monks were just about to jump off when one of the monks stubbed his toe, shouted, "Oh my God and St Mary," and that broke the spell. And then the pixies ran off and hid in a cave that is now called Pixie's Parlour. And every year on Pixie Day, this episode is reenacted on Broad Street with children dressed as pixies trying to capture the church bell ringers. And you wonder why people from the city think you're nuts. Even as a piece of folklore, it makes no sense. When the monks first told this story, did they go, "We've just been captured"? Who by? By things we don't believe in. Well, why did they capture you? For not believing in them. Well, you must believe in them now. No, we don't. They nearly threw us off a cliff. Any visitor that comes to Ottery St Mary, if they're very observant, they will notice that it's quite rural here, and there is the odd patch of farming. Now, I personally would be utterly useless on a farm. I'd be trying to milk the apples and plant the pigs. But I read this book by a local farmer, Journey into Farming by John Carter. He describes his farmhand, Nigel, in there. One day, he was painting a garage roof and slid down the side he'd just painted onto the grass. To get rid of the paint, he smothered himself in diesel fuel and rolled on the lawn, killing the grass. The next day, he smelt so bad, we set fire to his mattress. What a combination that is. Frank Spencer and someone from Ottery who thinks the answer to everything is to set fire to things. I slid down the roof and killed the grass. We better burn everything then. Ottery hasn't just been affected by events, it's also helped create them, such as when you had an impact on the future of writing and the French Revolution, because in 1772, as I'm sure everybody here knows, this was where the poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge was born and then brought up. And not that you make a fuss about it, of course. Apart from the hoarding in Broad Street telling of each building in the town he was ever in, and the stones in the park spelling out the poem Kubla Khan, and half the church dedicated to him, and plaques and pamphlets about him all around the tourist office by the table mouse mat. keep it pretty quiet. It's very Ottery St Mary, the fascination with Coleridge, because he was an opium addict. And because you make out that you're all tea shops and ancient weathercocks, but your all-time hero was a junkie. Even the doctor's surgery is called the Coleridge Medical Centre. Doctor, I've got a bit of a stiff neck. Better have some opium. I can understand why you must be proud at spawning one of the great English poets, and Coleridge certainly remembered his childhood in Ottery St Mary and wrote about it quite a bit. For example, in a published letter he described his time here. I was fretful and timorous and used to lie by the wall and mope. In another letter he recalls his days in the town equally fondly. He says, in my time there I was very miserable. And the tourist leaflets, I would imagine, identify these spots, saying, this is the wall where he moped. This is where he was miserable. And then came an incident that affected his whole life. Coleridge asked his mum for some cheese, which his mum gave him, but his brother swiped the cheese off him. So Coleridge and his brother started fighting, and his mum came in just at the time that Coleridge had picked up a knife. So she blamed him for the squabble, and it is said that Coleridge then ran off and hid in the Pixies' parlour cave for the night. And it's said that he carved his initials in the wall while he was there, and so people go down there now and they carve their initials in the wall, in the tradition of Coleridge. I went down there today and I noticed somebody's written Asbo on the wall. So I think in his way is what Coleridge would have wanted. But Coleridge was only about 7. This is the moment where, in a way, you find out what sort of person someone's going to be. Because, for example, I ran away when I was about 11, and I got to the woods, and I got to the point where you think, oh, I want to be warm. Oh, no, I'm freezing and hungry, and all I've got to do is accept humiliating surrender, and I can be warm. It will have shocked them because I've been away so long. And then I got back and they said, oh, you've been out? I thought you were in your room. But Coleridge stayed out all night with the whole town searching for him, and town criers going to neighbouring towns and getting them to come out. Up West Hill, maybe, to get them to come out in their Land Rovers. And Coleridge was 9 when he left here, when his father died, but he never forgot his roots. He came back in 1791 when he was 18, and he said, with great affection, the manner of the inhabitants annihilated whatever tender idea of pleasure I had. He even wrote a poem about his love for the church music of Ottery, wondering, who inspires each throat to sing such a screech owl note? Even though he lived in Bristol and all his family were here, he didn't bring his wife to Ottery for the first year of his marriage. Now, to be fair to you, I think this isn't Ottery's fault. This is pretty much Coleridge being moany, as far as I can see. Because I can't help thinking there was an air of snobbery about him at this point, especially towards his hometown, because he thought, oh, I'll go in a pub like the Volunteer with Southey and Wordsworth, and then someone will go, hey up, young Sam! Do you remember when we all went looking for you because you'd had that argument about cheese, crying and sobbing you were? Yes, I do remember. Well, I'm now a seminal founding member of the Romantic Poets Society. Yeah, I tell you, there's nothing romantic about that day. Stunk like a donkey's arse, you did. But by now we'd met the poet Robert Southey, and together they planned a society of equality called Pantisocracy. Now, some of their ideas would seem radical now. Coleridge said that women should be relieved of domestic chores, explaining, let married women do only what is convenient and let husbands do the rest. And as this is the town of Coleridge, I'm sure that's exactly what happens here. So if you get a bunch of tourists here on a coach trip that books up for a Coleridge guided tour, you can say, today we're going to follow in the steps of Coleridge by becoming feminist revolutionary activists, followed by light refreshments of heroin, before banging on the church door, shouting, shut up, then declaring, I can't stand it here, and taking everyone to Torquay. The Coleridge family have continued ever since as prominent characters in the town, often expressing the Ottery spirit. For example, in 1927, the Honourable Geoffrey Duke Coleridge wrote, "The thing that strikes me most about Ottery is when a thing has to be done, it doesn't have to be done for an hour and needn't be done for a day. And a week can go by. And it doesn't actually matter if it's never done at all." I think that's lovely and satisfying, isn't it? Probably a bit frustrating if you've had a heart attack and you're waiting for the paramedics. Now, it turns out my wife's grandfather was brought up here until he left in the 1920s, and we found a poem that he wrote after he moved up north that went, "Since moving north I often dream of fresh-baked scones and clotted cream. They've no idea up here, 'twould seem, the stuff they offer makes me scream." Now that, Coleridge, is a poem. The world of clotted cream, apparently, is divided between the Devon and Cornwall brands. So, are you familiar with that? Do you reckon you could tell the difference between a Devon and Cornwall clotted cream? Well, the main company producing Devon clotted cream, apparently, was called Definitely Devon. And then, do you know what Definitely Devon did? It moved to Cornwall. That puts Judas in the shade for treachery, doesn't it? It's like if UKIP moved its headquarters to Brussels. Now, I've always thought that a cream tea isn't so much a meal as a piece of culture. You know, people discuss the crumbliness of a scone. 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 You say scone here. Right, I want you to... right, cheer for scone. And now cheer for scone.
West Hill.
What about the cream on top or the jam on top? The cream first? And here is the news. It seems that a radio recording in Ottery St Mary has broken out into a mass brawl. Mostly, of course, this is a town that prides itself in its celebrations every November the 5th. The point of the evening is to take barrels that have been specially marinated in tar, and then someone in the barrel committee carefully lights it until flames shoot out of the middle and you can't even see the barrel. It's just a ball of fire, and then a carrier puts it on the back of the neck and goes, "Rah!" and runs into the middle of a massive crowd. And when it comes towards you, everybody screams as if to say, "I suppose on reflection a whizzing fireball is a hazard." And I can honestly say from experience that the nearer it comes to you, the more fun it is. There was a bald bloke next to me. He was about as excited as anyone I've ever seen doing anything. At one point he went, "It burned my head, it did!" And he turned to me, he said, "Feel that? It's burned my head!" I met one barrel runner and he said to me, "Take a look at my neck." And it was all covered in these sort of big blisters and scars. I said, "Is that from this year's barrels?" He went, "Oh no, that's from years ago." All the burning embers fall down your shirt, it's all part of it. Part of the celebration involves cannon being fired throughout the day. And I have to say, the pictures I've seen of lines of men in the woods firing into the air do look strangely like the sort of photos used as evidence against criminals at The Hague. Nelson Owen, who helped run the event for years, said about the cannon, "We were always careful to guard the gunpowder as we were fully aware of the risk, so it was kept in a biscuit tin." It's like health and safety gone mad, isn't it? So there'll have been houses where people went, "These custard creams are a bit spicy." Yesterday, Nigel the farmhand had a ginger nut. Lit fag, exploded. We've had to set fire to his bed again. But the amazing thing when you're there in the crowd is how quickly you get used to it. At first, you think, what the hell is Lunatic running at me with a flaming barrel? And after about half an hour, you become part of it and you're chatting to someone next to you. And then every now and again, you go, oh, better mind out, there's a swirling cauldron of flame coming towards me. And lots of the shops stay open through all of this. The solicitors was open, I know. Presumably there are people walking around with clipboards going, have you been involved in an accident in the last 15 minutes? And there's a variety of barrels through the night. So there's a children's part of the event, because what could be more suitable for a child? This is the only town where parents say to their kids, what have I told you about playing with fire? You're 7 years old, you should have started by now. So at this point, I'd like to introduce Martin. So how old are you now, Martin?
Just 16.
16, and you were at what age when you started?
7.
A veteran barrel roller. So is it it's a big thing to be at school the next day running with a barrel?
I feel like a hero.
Yeah?
You don't really know what's going on, except you've got this big hot barrel on your back, you've got to run, well, like an idiot, basically. But then when you go up to the bigger intermediate ones, you feel a bit, oh no, I've got to try and pick this up now. I'm going to have 7 other people trying to rip it off me.
So there's an element of competition in it then?
Yes, there is. Everyone's trying to nick it off each other, trying to have a laugh with it, basically.
I certainly thought when I was watching it, it's got far more claims to be an Olympic sport than dressage. Thanks very much, guys. Well, it was one of the most brilliant nights. I won't recommend it to everyone for reasons I'm going to come on to, because here's what I love most about it, really. In the programme that you can buy for the event, it says, don't come to the barrel burning if you're going to complain that you don't feel safe. What a refreshing attitude, because it's not like you're putting on a do for tourists. You're doing it because you want to do it, and you're going to do it anyway because you're mad, and that's what makes it a brilliant night. The Ottery Gazette said before the carnival, no doubt the public will attend in their thousands, though hopefully not as many as in previous years. I love the way this is the only festival that wants to keep tourists away. I bet the tourist board meet up here and go, what a successful season we've had. Only 9 people come all year. Hopefully next year we can get it down to no one. And this is a feeling that I believe has maybe been inherited through generations of otteriness, that you'll do what you always do, and if anyone comes from outside, they are quite welcome to join in, but you're not going to pretend. So, before I'd finish, I'd like to thank the King's School, where we all are here, which I imagine is the only school where you get expelled for not burning it down. And I think it is fitting that Ottery is the home of one of the Romantic poets, principled, in love with imagination, and who wrote these lines, and I'll leave you with this, Coleridge on Ottery St Mary. From France I hear liberty scream like an actor, reaching for Ottery to catch me off guard. But lo, it got stuck behind a huge tractor. And so it still waits by the turn-off from Chard. Yet here's where I learn to pursue truth when I'm able. Like that's for a mouse, not a map for a table. So let angels descend on this Devon town soon, as long as they don't ask for soup afternoon. And we'll welcome the angels with grand salutations, as soon as they've been here for 7 or 8 generations.
Mark Steele's In Town was written and performed by Mark Steele with additional material by Pete Sinclair. The producer was Sam Bryant.